welcome to Passage to Profit. I am Kenya Gipson, sitting in for Richard Gearhart.
And I'm Elizabeth Gearhart. I work at Gearhart Law, Richard Gearhart's law firm. We do patents, trademarks, and copyrights. I am not an attorney, but I do the marketing for the law firm. And usually Richard and I do this show together with Kenya as well. So we're happy to have everybody here. Kenya, can you do a short intro for our first guest?
Yeah, so really excited today. Joining us on the show is David Doerrier, who is a presentation skills expert. He's a voiceover talent, and he's the owner of Classic Long Island Radio Online. And he's a professional Santa Claus.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
And then we have Andrew Schulkind, who is a B2B marketing expert. I really mean that because I work with him. And he's the author of Marketing for Small B2B Businesses. And we are going to dig into some stuff today. But before that, we have our segment called IP in the News, except since Richard's not here, we're going to do marketing in the news because there has been some big marketing news this week. Today is July 12th. Kenya, what was the big marketing news this week?
So Instagram rolled out its version of Twitter, as some would say, which is called Threads. So if you're a big Twitter fan, but you also love Instagram, you now have the ability to play around with the interface in another way in the form of Twitter, right? So it's you can post pictures, you can write short sentences just like Twitter. So it's very similar in how you would use Twitter, but it's through the interface of Instagram. So I thought that was interesting this week. And 10 million people have joined, I think in like under, I don't know, I think it was 2 days or something crazy like that. It was nuts.
But if you join, there's a big caveat, because I was talking to some people about this last night at a networking thing. If you join Threads through your Instagram account, if you decide to delete Threads, it deletes your Instagram account too.
Yeah, that stinks.
You have to make sure you want it, but it does automatically post from Instagram to Threads. You can connect them together, right?
Well, kinda. So you can post from Threads to IG. I don't think it's the reverse way around. Like you have to post through Threads and then you can share to your stories and as a post. The only thing I didn't like about it, and I'm not sure if it was like a kink that they need to work out, when I went to go post on Threads and then I added it to my IG profile page, it took away some of my pinned post, which I was annoyed about. And then I had to, in order to get the pinned posts back, I had to delete the Threads post from my feed. So that was, I think that might've just been a glitch, but I did notice that happened. But I like it so far. I like it. I haven't used it that much. I think I've only posted like 3 times in there. I saw you had posted and tagged me in something, and then I had reposted it. But other than that, I've only posted like a couple times, but I'm also not a big Twitter person either. So I think that's probably why I haven't interacted with it as much.
Right. Well, I used Twitter years ago for the law firm. And then, after 2015 or so, it just started to, I think, get too filled up with like weird stuff. So I kind of quit using it, and I hadn't started any new Twitter accounts. But yes, I'm actually putting together, I have a website. I'm putting together my own brand, which is Elizabeth Gearhart, PhD. So I started a new Instagram account for that. And I started a thread for that because I have 4 different things I'm working on right now. And I feel like I'm scattered all over the place. So I just brought them together under one brand and one website. So so do you think it's going to displace Twitter?
No, absolutely not. And I think it's for a different type of user. So if you were never a Twitter person and you were like very codependent on IG, I think it's great for that type of person, that's what type of user I am. Like I don't use Twitter at all. I don't think that it's going to, take people away from Twitter altogether. I think it's cool. I think there's going to be a place for it in marketing. I think it's a great way to build a brand new audience quickly with content without a bunch of ads. So I encourage people, if you're not in the Thread space, to leverage the time now where it's not inundated with ads and a bunch of junk to build some really meaningful content and a new followership. But, I don't think Twitter's going away or it's going to be any less significant. It's just been around too long and people are too used to the way it works. Yeah.
So I want to go to our 2 guests. I do want to say this about our guests. So Andrew is a B2B marketer, so I can see him nodding his head. I'm sure he knows all about threads. And David is a message sculptor, I guess I want to call you. So he really helps people engage an audience and keep them engaged in presentations and speaking, and also as Santa Claus. But so, Andrew, let's start with you. What do you think about threads?
Let's see. I think I disagree maybe a little or potentially a little with Kenya that Twitter could go away. I mean, this might be a wake-up call for Elon. Then again, before this just happened with Threads, his investment that was a $44 billion investment I read recently was now worth 15 billion, which I'll take the 15 billion, but none of I used to have 44. So if this is a wake-up call for him, Twitter will survive. It's got a huge installed base, and he still has time to right the ship, perhaps. But it's a mess, and it's not just with Elon's involvement. Elizabeth, you mentioned 2015, 2016. That's sort of when things really sort of changed, I think, for Twitter. And it got very noisy and very difficult to navigate as a brand, I would say. So Threads is not fully formed, which is to be expected. That's kind of the way the tech world works. Everything's in beta all the time, and there are some pretty key features that are lacking in Threads that Twitter has, and I assume that they'll add them pretty much, as quickly as they can. I bet they have a pretty good engineering team. But it's already light years ahead of everything else that sort of stepped into that void trying to be the next Twitter, like Mastodon. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Mastodon, but it's kind of a DIY thing that was going to be the next Twitter, except you had to kind of be techie to make it happen. So really cool platform, but was never going to get that wide adoption the way that Twitter had and has, and that Threads is likely to get. It'd be interesting to see what the community turns into, whether it's more Instagram-like, more Facebook-like, or more Twitter-like.
It will be interesting. So, David, what are your thoughts?
I've never been a big Twitter user, and even I understand the importance of social media and the marketing behind social media. The only one social media platform that I've really been strongly a part of, and that was it still is LinkedIn. I've had it. I have several accounts on Twitter, but I haven't done much with them because I was finding that it's just taking up so much of my time it's like a full-time job on these different social media sites. I have now started to post more often on my Facebook page, on my business Facebook page, but LinkedIn is the place that I'm finding that I'm getting most of my leads and most of my contacts through there. And I really lost a lot of interest with Twitter when Elon Musk took over and all of that mayhem was going on. And that's when I even took any advertising that I have, I've taken off my Twitter feed link off of that, because number one, I'm not doing anything with it. Because if someone was to go there and see, well, he hasn't posted in 3 or 4 years, I look at that as credibility, that if you're going to have these social media links, that they have to be current and up to date, and you need to be doing something with them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. What do you think, Kenya?
I was going to say, I think the winning formula for Twitter is going to be, though, like it's not as censored as it used to be, right? I think that was one of the reasons why Elon Musk took it over. I see Meta as a very censored platform on all of the user faces, like so Facebook, Instagram. I can't imagine Threads is going to be any different. So I think the formula for winning there is if Twitter positions itself as a place of free speech, right, where people aren't going to be censored, that could be the thing that differentiates it over Threads, where it could be a very censored environment.
Or they could just decide it in the cage match. So anyway, well, thank you, everyone. It's time for a break right now. You are listening to Passage to Profit, Road to Entrepreneurship, and we will be right back.
Welcome back to Passage to Profit. I'm Kenya Gipson, sitting in for Richard Gearhart. I'm here with my co-host Elizabeth today, and we are joined by David Doerrier, who is a presentation skills expert. I mentioned earlier in the intro that he is a voiceover talent, and he's the owner of Classic Long Island Radio, and he's also a professional Santa Claus, which I find very, very interesting. So welcome to Passage to Profit.
Thank you so much, Kenya, Elizabeth, and for inviting me to be a part of today's show.
So you are a public speaking expert. What is the most important thing? Let's just dive right in.
Most important thing is to know your audience. One of the things that I see that many speakers struggle with is not first understanding who it is that they're speaking to. And sometimes they'll come into that room and speak to the audience as if we are all experts in that same field, which is going to cause that the information is going to go right over our heads. So the most important thing, know your audience.
What does talking and telling ain't training or selling mean?
Oh, that's a great question. That's my tagline: talking and telling ain't training or selling. And that comes from my many years as a trainer. My background is training and development, and also training trainers to train. And what I have found in the past is many subject matter experts will feel that because they're an expert in their field, it automatically qualifies them to be a great presenter or a great trainer. So they'll come into a room and just start talking and telling information to an audience, and there's no engagement in that. And by just talking and telling, that does not equal engaging training or engaging selling.
So do you work with people individually? Do you work with clients, and do you help them get to that point where they can engage an audience?
Yes, yes, and yes. So it's individual one-on-one coaching, as well as team coaching, and working with teams of trainers, teams of salespeople, teams of executives, mid-level managers as well, and helping them all achieve the same thing. And that is taking their existing experience with speaking, but helping them to understand how to incorporate engagement principles into their current presentations.
No, I was just gonna say that's very interesting. I was gonna ask, what are some of the pitfalls of public speaking, would you say?
Well, a great question. Thank you, Kenya. One is not knowing your audience. And the second, I've had an opportunity to evaluate a lot of people over the last 15 or 20 years. Many of these people were in corporate, many of them were in networking events. And I always walked away with three things that people seem to struggle with the most. And one was not knowing the audience. The second was not incorporating stories into their presentations. Most times people were just throwing out data to their audience. And by incorporating stories, now you're emotionally bringing people in to your message. If you're talking about a client or a past hardship of some sort that we can all relate to, that we're going to learn something from, that's going to help us, those stories are going to help us to see it, smell it, taste it, experience it within ourselves, and we are all going to be more emotionally connected. The third area that I see that many speakers were struggling with is a compelling conclusion. There were many speakers that would just get to the end of their presentation, get to the end of the training, whatever it happens to be, and say, "Good night, we're out of here." And there was nothing to conclude. And simply, you can have a review. If it's training, let's review what it is that we covered today, because your audience, one of the principles of engagement is repetition, and the audience is needing to have that review so we can kind of put it all together again. What did we do today? We spent all day in here. Let's review it. A speaker can also do the same thing, could have a review at the end, and definitely some sort of a call to action.
Well, that's interesting. So how do you make a boring person interesting, David?
Well, first of all, that's a great question. First of all, that boring person, first of all, has to have the motivation to want to be a compelling speaker. If they, if that's what their objective is, if So that's where I need to start. Do you want to do this? Do you want to put the work in to be a more compelling speaker, Mr. or Mrs. Boring Person? So I'm definitely going to start with that, and then understand what are their objectives, who is their audience, and understand their topic, and start crafting. It depends on where that individual is in their speaking career. If I have to start with the foundational skills of which I call the ABCs of speaking in public, understanding your agenda, your beliefs, and the 5 core communication skills, we may have to start there with just foundational skills. Maybe we need to work through the fear. Maybe that person who is boring, maybe it's because of all that fear that's built up inside of them, and they're afraid to open up. Underneath, if we were to open up those doors, we may find an unbelievably exciting and vibrant person underneath all of that.
That's a very interesting perspective, because I think sometimes, even as a presenter or someone who is like an open communicator, sometimes there's like a sense of that person being a little introverted, right? Do you find that in some of the people that you train who are like maybe like boisterous or great communicators, but there's a sense of them being a little reserved depending on the situation?
Yeah. I even find that yes, just like you said, those off stage, you have the individual that is very vibrant, very outgoing, but once they get on stage, a lot of those insecurities come in. I kind of relate speaking in public or speaking on a stage as if you're standing in front of an audience naked. You're being judged, or there's that perception of being judged by your audience. But I should say that being nervous, if anyone is nervous, guess what? You're normal, because we all get nervous before a situation like that, before getting up in front of an audience. It's not natural for us to be up in front of an audience speaking, but it's learning the foundational skills of how to work through that nervousness. Number one, reframe it and say, I'm excited, versus saying that I'm nervous, and understanding that your audience wants you to be successful. There is usually only one person in that room that feels that this talk is going to go south or is not going to work correctly. Can you guess who that one person is?
The speaker, of course.
Exactly. But the speaker needs to understand being nervous is normal, and your audience wants you to be successful.
What do you think of the advice to picture the audience naked?
Does
that work?
It doesn't work for me, and I've heard it many times. To me, it might be more of a distraction.
Yeah, it doesn't work for me either. And I love what you said about the nerves, because I always want to feel a sense of nervousness. It makes me not rely on my own dependency, right? Because I feel like we get our gifts, and I'm like, all right, God, this is coming from you. I'm not going to lean my own understanding. I want to lean on you. So I love that you said that. And the other thing, can you have the opposite effect when you're like talking on stage? Like, so can you be comfortable and then like, so for example, I am not a great networker. Like when I have to be forced to talk to people one-on-one in small little settings, I'm like, oh, I don't like, I'm more comfortable speaking to people in a larger group setting than I am networking one-on-one. Do you find that happens with some people?
Oh, definitely. It happens with me. I was not born with the gift of gab. As a young pimply kid growing up on Long Island, New York, I was looking for the closest cave that I could be in for the rest of my life. It's just that powers that be has put me into career fields that has put me up in front of an audience on a daily basis. I started by being in the military, then radio broadcasting, theater, training as a corporate trainer for a number of years. So I had to learn how to be able to speak in front of large groups of people, and I am not comfortable with small talk. I, like many actors, if you watch that program, the Actors Studio that was on years ago on Bravo, and most of those actors, many of those actors would say the same thing, that they were more comfortable on stage than they were with small talk.
Yeah, I saw a famous actor on this talk show once, and he was terrible Like he just, it was like, go back to acting, dude. Don't do the talk show circuit. I think you're right. So what do you do with people who like to mumble like this and drone on in monotone and won't talk in a normal way?
Well, you're bringing up a lot of great questions. So, well, first of all, the only way to get through to people is for them to recognize the need of change. I can certainly bring up and give the evaluation and say that I saw these things within your presentation, and one of them was that you need to open up your mouth more and I need to give them a reason of why it's important. But what's most important is they need to see it themselves. I learned this from training. I could be in front of the room and tell, if you're just telling everybody that they need to change, I'm telling you to do this, I'm telling you to do that, your audience is not going to change. They have to see it, feel it, understand it for themselves, and understand the WIFM. What's in it for me? What's the value in stopping mumbling? What's the value of enunciating my words? They need to find that out themselves.
Yeah, well, back in the good old days when everybody was in the studio for every show, we had Noah for that. So we would get the mumblers and we would get the droners, and Noah would come running in. And it was so funny. We'd be like, oh, here comes Noah, you're in trouble. and that helped a lot. But yeah.
I think some people don't even realize how they're coming across to their audience because they're so used to speaking in that way. No one has said anything to them, so they think it's okay.
Yeah, I do that sometimes. Like I have a tendency to talk quickly, and I think I'm coming off as like coherent to someone, and they'll turn around and be like, what'd you say? And I need that sometimes, right? We all need a little nudge to be a little bit more articulate. I want to talk though, however, about the biggest sale of all time, which is Santa Claus, right? So how have you been able to, first of all, how did you get into that, right? As a character, and do you feel that you've used some of your experience with playing Santa Claus into your trainings and how you've taught people how to be better public speakers?
That's a great question. So first of all, how I got started in it, at the time I was living in Northern California. I was working full-time radio at the time, but like many people in radio, I found some of the fame, but none of the fortune. So I had to go out and find a part-time job. I was doing some community theater. I did a lot of community theater for about 15 years, and I was scanning the newspaper and outside of Oakland, California, and I saw an ad that said Santa's wanted. And I immediately was attracted to that. I went down to the Western Temporary Agency in Oakland, California. They put me through their little Santa school. I left there with a box that had a Santa suit inside of it. I didn't have the beard at the time. I had to strap it on, and I was starting within a day or so. I was doing Santa visits, and I was doing malls and larger engagements. And two things happened to me immediately. Number one, I felt comfortable. There was a lot that I had to learn about being a good Santa Claus. However, I felt good in being in the shoes of that character. There, not to go too much into it, but there was something about Christmas in my home as a child that was very emotional to me. And those feelings were coming back, and envisioning my father and his presence. He was not Santa, but he had that Santa Claus presence on Christmas morning. So those feelings were coming back, and I just found that I loved it. And I found immediately that wearing a Santa suit's like wearing a magnet. You are like the Pied Piper in that thing, and you are the center of attention. But for years, I had the strap-on beard and the mustache and all that, and I felt that it was easy for me to hide behind that. It wasn't David; it was Santa Claus in that room. So there was quite an adjustment. Well, it turned out it wasn't much of an adjustment when I do Santa with the real beard. I still do the same shtick. Same thing.
So what's the
Hey, you look
weirdest
like a
thing?
legit,
Yeah, yeah, you do look legit. What's the
like
weirdest
a
thing any
legit
kid?
Santa.
Yeah, what's the weirdest thing any kid has ever asked you for?
Well, that's a great question. I get them every year. The one that pops to mind first is a young lady, 7, 8-ish years old, and she wanted real estate for Christmas. And in years
Gosh.
past, before the internet being as big as it was, kids would come in with clippings from Walmart ads, the Sears catalog, and they'd have things circled and pointing it out. It's available at this store and that store, and it costs this much. They'd have all the pages. And what I find most exhilarating of being Santa Claus and most emotional is that young lady or the young boy that comes up and they have written a letter to Santa Claus. They're all dressed up in their Sunday best. And that to me is just really emotional to think that, I have no idea what went on before they showed up here, but I'm thinking that they picked out their outfit. They were anticipating going to see Santa at whatever day it was. They've written out this letter to Santa Claus, their list to Santa Claus, and I've got boxes. I saved all of them because I just could not throw any of that away.
Interesting. Screaming children, right? Kind of like having a bad audience reaction, right? How do you deal with that? And then how do you teach people who you're teaching to present to deal with like a poor audience reaction?
That's a good one.
Yeah. So definitely two somewhat relatable. I think in the Santa situation, I think if you can remove the adult out of the situation, the kids would be a lot better. Because what I have found is that, especially if there's a line waiting to see Santa, and what I've been able to observe as much as I can, because I'm really busy with what's going on around me, but what I'm able to observe is that many adults will say, okay, when we get up there, don't be scared. I know you wanted to see Santa. And then they may see other kids getting all excited. Now the kid who's online is getting all excited saying, well, mom's telling me not to be excited. That kid just started crying. Oh my God, when I get up there, what's going to happen? And so that's kind of the anxiety that happens. And sure, I'm a tall guy. I'm 6'2", and I get in that suit. I'm even bigger when I'm in that suit. And usually I'm sitting down when I'm with the kids, but a big guy in a red suit, it's kind of intimidating at times. So how do I deal with it? Number one, don't force the kid on Santa. I have seen those kids just go into panic mode the closer you put them to Santa. It's amazing what happens. And don't force them. Let them stand a little bit away from Santa. Let them kind of get used to the surroundings a little bit. They're also in a foreign place. They're in the middle of a mall. They're surrounded by all of these other people in this strange environment. So they got a lot of things that's going on right at that one time.
Well, I'm just going to say this, and then we have to go to break, and then we want to hear the second question, the answer to the second question Kenya asked. But I will say we teach our kids stranger danger, and then we go tell them sit on the stranger's lap.
Or force them to sit on Santa's knee.
Yeah. So anyway, you're listening to Passage to Profit, Road to Entrepreneurship with Kenya Gipson sitting in for Richard Gearhart. I'm Elizabeth Gearhart, and we will be right back after these messages.
Welcome back to Passage to Profit. I'm Kenya Gipson sitting in for Richard Gearhart, and Elizabeth and I have been sitting here having a great conversation with David Doerrier, who was just talking about his professional Santa Claus career and how he's teaching people how to be presenters and all the things. So welcome back.
Thank you.
And you had asked a question, Kenya. What do you do if you're up on stage speaking and you're losing your audience and they don't like what you're saying?
Well, there's a lot wrapped into that. Yes. If they don't like what you're saying, yes, that's certainly one thing. I think that let's use another. Yeah, that's certainly one scenario. And that there is based on what the individual is saying. Maybe it's not resonating with the audience. Maybe there is a good example of a presenter that hasn't really gauged who their audience is, and they're delivering the wrong message to the wrong audience. And let's take another scenario, and that is that it is the right audience, it is the right message, but it's not engaging the audience. They're losing the audience. So there are a couple of things that I would suggest. Number one is having some sort of a compelling opening that's going to immediately engage the audience. And one of the ways to do that is by starting off with a question, certainly a relevant question. For example, a question I could ask my audience: how many people here get nervous when you're speaking in front of others? And I could follow that up with an additional question. And so that there is going to immediately engage the audience. And then my job as a speaker is to continuously engage them with stories, with anecdotes, with rhetorical questions of some sort. And depending on the situation, maybe they could do some sort of an exercise, either on their own or in small groups, for example.
We had a note here about engaging virtual audiences, and I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about some of the differences and like some of the tactics that could be used there.
Yeah, well, a lot of the same things that you use on stage can be used virtually. You just have to crank everything up to an 11. I think that in both situations, whether it's on stage or virtual, the most important part is setting that stage up front, is letting people know, what are we doing? How are we going to do it? What can you expect from me, the presenter? What can I expect from you, the audience? And again, immediately engaging them right in the beginning. If it's all just chatter, if it's all just data, whether it's on stage or virtual, it's so much easier to lose your audience. I have 3 screens here. I could be easily playing tic-tac-toe on some other screen or doing some other work over here. But if you're asking me questions, if you're telling me relevant stories, if you're making it interesting to me, I'm going to be more compelled to stay connected.
Well, this does kind of dovetail into the question I wanted to ask you. So a little bit of background. I saw this woman give a presentation, and I felt like she was over rehearsed, and I felt like some of the stuff she was doing was not natural. Like she was doing this karate chop thing and approaching the audience. And I'm like, that doesn't look normal for you. Like, I don't think you would do that if you were talking to your best friend. So can you be over rehearsed and then you get kind of wooden, right?
Yeah, it's definitely over rehearsed. Based on the way that you described this woman who was doing the presentation, I'd be curious if she was reading her notes and being that over rehearsed. Yeah, definitely. You want to be you when you're presenting. You want to have your nuances, your stutters. I stutter at times. I get hung up on words. I call that my record is skipping at times, but that's a part of me. That's one of the things that in Toastmasters I always get evaluated on and people pick up on. But you've got to be yourself. However, you do need to have those foundational skills. How do you open a presentation? Making transitions, engaging questions, asking questions the correct way, responding to people correctly. In virtual world, the number one way of connecting with your audience is your camera, looking directly into the camera. How many times have you seen someone who's making a presentation and they're talking the whole time looking over here at this screen because that's where all the faces are? Yeah, I'm looking at all the faces, but I'm not looking at my audience by looking into that camera.
Yeah, it's weird.
So Andrew, you're starting to promote your book and you're starting to go on a lot of podcasts and stuff. Are you finding any challenges?
I'm not sure that I've found any that are specific to that. Speaking to an audience is always, can always be a challenge. I'll ask David a question I have based on an experience I had where it sort of came to mind very early on. You mentioned there's only one person in the room who is, thinking this might fail. And I think that's true in this instance, but I was brought in to speak to a small group of CEOs about thought leadership and using that in your marketing. And I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes into what was supposed to be 3 hours worth of presentation and interactivity, the person who brought me in was feigning sleep in his seat. Clearly, I was not giving him what he expected.
Oh my gosh, what a jerk.
Yeah, and being kind about it, we could say, well, he really wanted this to succeed, and he felt badly that this was not what he had advertised, I guess, or we had miscommunicated in some way. And I took the hint and pretty quickly pivoted to the interactive portion of what we were doing. What would you have done in that situation, or what would you have suggested?
Well, great question. So my first observation or question around that is his going to sleep. Did that have to do with what you were saying, or is it just this individual just didn't get any sleep last night and there's stuff going on in this guy's world that is causing him to go to sleep? So is it you, do you think, was the problem, or is it him that's the problem?
Oh, it was me. In his estimation,
you.
It was me. I was
Okay.
not giving him what he expected.
Okay.
Oh.
So that's a good observation that you keyed in on that you, and where it didn't become a big distraction to you, where some people someone's fallen asleep and now that has caused me to just fall apart up on stage. So it's good that you transitioned. So if you felt that it wasn't going in the right direction, maybe there was an opportunity to get some polling questions to feel out your audience on what would be most important to them based on the topic of what you were talking about. Based on that, what would be most important for you all to learn about that topic?
That's a great suggestion. Thank you. That's
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, Andrew, you're very professional, because I would have probably called the guy out.
Well,
It was
I'm
tempting.
curious. Yeah, I was. So did you ask him, Andrew? He told you that was the reason why that he
Yeah,
was.
afterwards, I said, hey, what's up with that? That's, that really, as David just pointed out, that really could have gone south in a hurry if it had just flustered me. And I think, looking back on it now, and especially in light of what David said, I should have said, hang on, everybody. It seems like maybe I'm not giving what was expected here. Let's talk a little about what your expectations are, and we can move right into some interactive exercises to drive some of these points home. But let me know if that's where we want to go. And I really just pivoted on my own, and of course this fellow miraculously woke up and everything was fine.
Well, that was a super good question. We need to take another break now. When we come back, we're going to go into Fireside and Power Move, and then we're going to go into Andrew's interview. And so if we want to pick up the string again, we can, because I think this is really important, ways to pivot. So anyway, you're listening to Passage to Profit with Kenya Gipson, filling in for Richard Gearhart. I'm Elizabeth Gearhart. We will be right back. Welcome back, listeners. You are listening to Passage to Profit with Kenya Gipson, sitting in for Richard Gearhart. I'm Elizabeth Gearhart. We have just been speaking to David Doerrier, and wow, that's all I've got to say. All of us have to make presentations today, whether we want to or not, and he's got the secret sauce if you want to keep people listening. But right now, we're going to do Power Move. Kenya's going to do her Power Move, and then I'm going to talk about my company, my couple of projects. And then we're going to go right into the interview with Andrew Schulkind, who is a B2B marketer. So as David said, Andrew sets you up to get all the leads, and David gives you the communication skills to land the leads as clients. So Kenya, who's Power Move?
Yes, so for Power Move today, we are going to be talking about Rosemarie Goncalves. She is a stager of the 24-hour flip on A&E TV. And I'm highlighting her today because she was recently on my Power Move podcast. And she is an interior designer who found her calling for aesthetics and design through a friend who had saw her work. So she figured out that she had this gift and she had this calling, and she was able to transition from just doing interior home design to doing it as a stager on TV, and got picked up for the show. So I thought that was a major power move, right? Because how hard is it to land a gig on TV, and not only land a gig on TV, but doing something that you're really good and passionate about. So she is our power move for today, and you can check her out and listen to her story on my Power Move podcast.
Congratulations to her. That is really hard to do. Yeah.
So hard to do. So
yeah,
but it can be done, right?
I guess so. So I'm going to talk about a couple projects I'm doing. So one of them is Blue Streak Directory. It's a video directory of B2B businesses online. And Andrew Schulkind is helping me set up the platform. We're doing a website. And it's really exciting. We've decided to do a couple new things. I want to go start promoting this. So we're going to do a landing page so people can sign up. And when we go live, when we launch, they'll know. And yeah, so we're making a lot of progress on that. I found a piece of software that we're going to integrate with the site. I don't want to say too much about it right now because I don't want to give away all my secrets, but it was something that really didn't exist when I started this as Fireside in 2019, or it was just really early days for it. And as Andrew said, I love what Andrew said. Tech is always in beta, right, Andrew? So this is still and I'm taking some software that was made for something else for a different purpose, and we're trying to adapt it to use with the website. So that's exciting and fun for me. And then I also have a podcast with Danielle Woolley. It's called the Jersey Cats podcast, where we talk about cats. And it started because I have a cat who kept scratching at his face and just got really horrible. And took him to vets. I ended up counting up the number of vet visits and medicine changes. It was 26 over 8 months. Vet visits and medication changes. I know, horrible. Finally solved the problem. He was scratching his face, added to his steroid regime, and he's on cyclosporine now. We added Zyrtec, of all things. There isn't an antihistamine for cats, and it was because I noticed that I got a rash when he laid his face on my arm. I said to the vet, I said, I would take an antihistamine for this. What would you give a cat? He's like, there's nothing for cats, but we can give him Zyrtec. So started a podcast to try to get help from the community to figure out, how can I help this poor little cat who's just scratching himself? It was awful. I have pictures, and I don't even want to show them to people because it's so painful to even look at. Long story short, he's fine now. It's controlled. I'm going to have to give him the medicine every day, and he's kind of gotten used to it. But we started this podcast, and we're building a community, and we have a guest come on. We don't record at the same time all the time like this, because this is a radio show, so we have to be consistent, but we record when our guests are available. And we have all sorts of people talking about all sorts of things. Cats. And Kenya, I do want to ask your sister, who's a vet, to come on, because I think she'd be really good. So
Thank you.
So without further ado, I want to now introduce Andrew Schulkind. So he has the name of his company is Andigo, and he is the author of Marketing for Small B2B Businesses. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks. Very nice to be here. Andigo is a company. We are a digital marketing and strategy agency. We work mostly with B2B businesses in the $2 to $25 million range, helping them to build marketing muscle, as we say, with content marketing programs and website design and development. We work with a range of industries within that $2 to $25 million range, and focus a lot on working with mission-driven businesses. So B Corps and similar organizations with a double bottom line approach to creating profits and doing some good in the world at the same time. Our approach can be summed up in 3 words: motivation, message, and metrics, which means that we work with you to make sure we understand the motivation of your audience and audience segments, which we can get into. They've got a problem to solve, of course, but what is happening that has helped them realize that there's an issue? What are the costs of that issue? Are there costs to doing nothing? Is there an outcome that would help them get over the perceived risk of taking action, whether that action is with you or someone else? Those are the kinds of things that we want to understand in order to craft a message based on that motivation, and then take that message and adapt it for various product or service lines you may have, for the audience segments I mentioned a minute ago, and kind of critically and often overlooked, for where in the buying journey your audience is. They're going to have different levels of knowledge and different interests and concerns depending on whether they are just starting on this buying journey and education of themselves, or whether they're very close to making a decision. Along the way, we'll define some metrics that will help us track whether we're achieving the results we want, and will help us be thoughtful in iterating our work as we strive to improve marketing results consistently over time.
How long have you been doing this?
Yeah.
How long does it look like I've been doing it? That long, at least. I started a company before Andigo in 1993 and started Andigo in 1996. So we've been at it for a while. And funny, because in the beginning, it was such a young industry, and I was just a kid. I had a partner in 1993, and he would go out and sell, and he would come back and say, hey, I told them we could do this. And then I would spend that night and the next day figuring out whether we could do that and how. And it's, I think back now and I'm like, wow, I didn't sleep. That's just so stressful. And fortunately, we're not involved in that kind of world anymore, but that's how young it was. And no one was in any different position. We were all trying to figure it out on the fly, which was kind of fun, but not something I would want to continue for, 27 years.
So I am reading Andrew's book, and I do want to talk about his book, Marketing for Small B2B Businesses, because I love this book. And it's not just because, hey, there it is. Not just because I know Andrew and respect him and love the work he's doing on my website. Not just that, but if I didn't know Andrew, I'd still love this book, because one of the things I like the most about it, well, two things. It's real knowledge, like real actionable knowledge. So you can actually take the things in there and use them in your business. But the other thing is he has kind of short chapters, which we talked about previously. And the short chapters give you time to kind of digest and really understand and think about ways to use what you just learned in your business. So I think we had talked about, when we were talking about the speaking, like people that just throw a bunch of information at you and you're sitting there going, ah. But this really gives you the chunks that you can digest and think about for your business, and then move on to the next section.
Yeah, I'm glad you noticed that, Elizabeth, because it's very much a conscious choice, and maybe a little bit unconscious too, because so much of what we do for ourselves and on behalf of our clients is done online. And of course, nobody reads, right? It's all you scan and you hope that there's a headline that catches your eye, and then maybe you dig a little bit deeper. But the idea is it's got to be quick, it's got to be punchy, and it does have to give you a chance to take that action before you're just jumping off onto the next thing. So I'm glad you noticed that. Thank you.
Yeah. So what is the first thing you tell your clients they need to do?
So much of that depends on sort of where they are, which is something that David touched on earlier, depending on sort of their skill level and comfort and level of sophistication. But more than anything, it's understanding who their audience is, and understanding that the key to marketing today is providing value. Like we all know about unique selling propositions and key differentiators and all that, but your marketing has to do that as well. There has to be information in there that's of use to me as a prospect, and not just information about you. All that comes later. At some point, I guess I'll care, where you went to college and how many collective decades of experience you have and all that stuff that's, in the about section of your website. But in the beginning, I want to know not just what you do, but what you can do for me, right? That's something that I'm pretty fond of saying. Your prospects don't care about you. Your prospects don't even care about what you do. Your prospects care about what you can do for them. So that's where you've got to start. And if there's nothing else that you take away from any conversation you have with me, it should be that. And go review every piece of marketing you have, from your website to, tiny little social media posts, and think about whose perspective it's being written from. Is it about you, or is it about your audience, the help that they are trying to get? And in having that conversation, are you shining a light on your own expertise, sort of as an addition? It's really more got to be about them.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So I want to take it even a step back further, right? And like defining what content marketing actually is, right? Because I feel like I've been marketed to since MTV was around, right? Like in subliminal ways. So could you just like define what content marketing is so that people know exactly how to distinguish it from anything else that they might be engaging with?
Sure. Although at this point, I think the lines have pretty well blurred. I would say that, old-fashioned marketing was very inward facing. It's about me and us, and less about you and what you need. Although that concept isn't new, right? There was always the differentiation between features and benefits. And if you're talking about features all the time, that's fine, except no one really wants a 1/4-inch drill bit. They want a 1/4-inch hole, right? Like that's what they have this problem. They need to drill this hole. That's what they're trying to do. And they don't really care how it's done. I mean, there's pretty much just one way to do that these days, right? Like that's what we all know. But that's the difference in marketing. Are you talking about the drill bit, or are you talking about the outcome? And I think that to me sums up what the, sort of underlying goal of content marketing is these days.
Is that a Roy Williams quote?
I'm not sure.
I feel like I read a book called The Wizard of Ads. I'm like, I read that somewhere before. But that's it. That's interesting that you say that, because I feel like there's all these different opportunities and ways to be creative to direct market to someone, right? Whether it be a product placement and music or a video piece, or again, a laundry list of like, here are all the things we do. So if you had to advise your client, like, what is the best lane in terms of like highlighting those benefits versus just writing out a laundry list of like, we do this, we do this, we do this, kind of like the George Carlin bit. I don't know if you remember George Carlin's bit on.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see if this answers your question. I think most critically is figuring out where your audience is, understanding where they are and where you can meet them on their own turf so that they are comfortable, right? They've got their guard a little bit further down, rather than, when we're all opening direct mail pieces, our guard's up. Like, I'm until proven otherwise, this is garbage. I'm not even sure why I'm opening it, and I might open it or I might not. Whereas if you get them in say, a LinkedIn group, perhaps, since I'm talking mostly about B2B, where they've already had great experiences having really interesting and informative conversations with their peers, and you can slide in there with something of value, and that would cause them to say, oh, hey, this is a person who knows what he or she is talking about. That's much more valuable than spamming a group like that with a flyer that, is offering 50% off your service X, or, whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think applying what you're, trying to do thoughtfully that way really makes sense, which of course is different than some of the examples we were just talking about, which were, more B2C focused, product placement and things like that.
Right. So David, do you have a comment or question?
What I find fascinating with what it is that you do is the similarities between what someone needs to think about when they craft a speech and the same things they need to think about when they are building their business. Who's your audience? That it's not about you, it's about what it is that you can bring to your audience. And what one thing can you say is the one area that these business owners seem to struggle with the most when they come to you and say, I need a website? And then what do you think they struggle with the most?
Whether it's the folks who are coming to us asking for a website, or telling us they need to do social media, and frequently that word "do" that's the verb that's being used. Whatever the marketing related question is, very often there hasn't been much thought given to why and to what they hope to accomplish. So we try and roll back to that point, which sometimes starts getting into questions of branding, right? Is this on brand with who you are, and is it consistent with the brand that you've put out there already? But we really want to make sure that there's an understanding of that, because our expertise really only has value if we can put into place tactics that are going to work. And so maybe you do need a new website, but let's talk about why. What's not working about this website? How do you know that? Do you have metrics that are pointing you in that direction? Or are you just getting anecdotal complaints? In that case, should we have some conversations with prospects, with current clients, with employees, right? We're very much of the opinion that marketing does not end when the sale is closed. Every point of contact that you have with a customer thereafter is marketing, and it is branding at that point. And you really have to pay attention to whether that's a positive experience or a negative experience. And, it's always the ground in the middle, which of course, the grand bell curve of life, right? Most of things are in the middle. At one extreme, things are so terrible that the client just walks out. the other extreme, things are so wonderful that they become champions for you and great referral sources. But in the middle, there's a great opportunity to turn those folks who are just having an okay experience, and inertia is keeping there because you're doing what you promised, but you're not delighting them or wowing them in any way that is making them think, gosh, I have to tell someone else about this. So I want to make sure that they understand that there has to be a reason behind what we're doing, and then you have to execute really, really well. Do fewer things well.
So what channels do you think people should be on in social media? Does that depend on their business too? Of course it does.
Threads, all threads. No.
Threads. Everybody jump on threads. Hey, it's not contaminated yet.
You said it, you framed it in the question. It really depends on your business, right? You know, David mentioned earlier, he's most active on LinkedIn. That's true for my business as well. That's where our audience is. So that's where it makes the most sense for us to be. There was a period, it seems to be waning a bit, where I was surprised at the number of our clients who were telling us about the success they were having on Facebook as B2B companies. And there are groups out there for PR professionals and marketers and all sorts of other industries that, you know, if you sort of that probably 40 to 55 age group, that it was really popular and did really, really well. So it really does depend on your audience and where they are.
Yeah, I've always felt like LinkedIn was the best thing for B2B. I've heard some negative things about it from people, and I do find like LinkedIn is super saturated now. Like I get invites and I used to get invites, which was fine, but people want me to follow them to join their company page I get promotions all the time. So it's kind of getting messy.
It is, and that's true everywhere. I'd say that's true with SEO, pay-per-click advertising. It's very difficult to break through all of that noise, which I'll separate from competition. There's plenty of competition, there always was, but now there's just so much noise that isn't really competitive. You're just competing to get someone's attention, you know, pushing all that stuff aside. Tough, no question.
Yeah. So do you think that narrowing who you define as your audience helps with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where audience segmentation becomes really critical, and understanding that you can't be all things to all people. And even, you know, what you do, you know, the fact that we talk about being a content marketing agency and a web development agency, that's a challenge, right? From a marketing standpoint. And most of our marketing focuses on one or the other, right? So that we're out there, you know, trying to niche down, and, you know, by talking about the mission-driven businesses we work with, trying to niche down further. So that's sort of the key. Any other good business that comes in, you know, over the transom, that's fantastic, but you shouldn't be out there marketing to try and get those companies as well.
When you take a look at like behavioral insights, when you're developing plans for your clients, like what does that look like in terms of like how people are consuming certain platforms, or even like from a qualitative standpoint, like what their interests may be? Like how do you work that into the plan for your clients?
Yeah, you know, that brings to mind a period a couple of years ago where, boy, every new client that came in asking for a website wanted to build a mobile-first website. It had to be mobile-first. And because we work with B2B businesses, you know, this is when responsive coding was kind of new, and you could build one website and it would adapt automatically to, you know, the size screen, the type of device it was being displayed on, which is fantastic. It really is a wonderful advance. But people wanted this mobile first approach, even though we would point out that let's take a look at your analytics for your website, and we'll find that 12% of your audience is mobile, right? You're a B2B company. People are at their desks typically. Yeah, you might get some folks who are going to check things out on their phone or iPad while they're commuting, but well, it's 12% of them. Do we really want a mobile first approach? So let's look at the data. That's the first answer. Let's look at the data and have it tell us where we should be going, with, you know, some grains of salt thrown in there. If your mobile experience is really bad, maybe that 12% would be 20% if we improve it. So certainly let's not throw away 1/5 of your audience, but maybe mobile first isn't really the approach we need to take. Similarly, I would look at analytics and get a sense of what path people are taking through a website, particularly if there are differences between the paths they take depending on where they came from. Did they come from your email marketing campaign? Did they come from a social media campaign? Did they just land on the homepage and you're not sure how? Where did they go? What did they look at? And when did they leave? Are there any clues that you can tease out of that to tell you that there are bottlenecks, or that you're not converting them, doing sort of the mini conversions, getting them to consume another piece of content or join your mailing list or something like that? So very much a data-driven approach, I think, is what you've got to take if you're trying to suss out different parts of an audience and their interest in different kinds of products or services that you're offering.
Yeah, I think the mobile thing too is interesting when you think of the age demographic. And you're right, B2B people are at their desks. So with Blue Streak that I'm developing, I'm in this peer advisory board, and I got a lot of feedback from my board this week during our meeting, and they're like, yeah, but you can't use the software, not the website, but this other software on your phone. One of the young people in there said that, but the other people were like, yeah, but who's your target? And it's like, well, my target are people that have established businesses. So they're probably a little older. They're probably not doing everything on their phone. Like my 27-year-old daughter does everything on her phone. She doesn't even have a computer anymore. And I'm like, how can you live that way? But I think that the people that I'm targeting for B2B probably are at their desk with a laptop or a desktop, right?
Yep. And that's, we've already looked at the data there, and that bore that out. Absolutely.
Yeah. David, do you have another comment? We're getting close to the end of our time. This is really good information, great information.
So what comes in, what are some of the trends now with websites? I being a consumer or being a viewer of different websites, and I was looking at a variety of different websites just the other day doing some research, and I'm just seeing that these websites are transforming into these multimedia, very engaging type of platform. So what is the current trend in what's important to have on your website today?
Let's see. I would say that we are entering a period, or coming out of a period, where so many websites looked the same. There was really a similarity across design that just seemed to, go through, whether it was people emulating Apple or, just some trend that, sort of took the world by storm. And we seem to be moving past that into another era of much more diversity in terms of what websites look like. I don't know that there are technologies that I would say, there are things like parallax design where, things move at different rates down the screen. But that sort of page choreography is making a bit of a comeback, that there is more engagement visually on pages, but at the same time, there's still a lot of use of white space, as there should be, so that you're keeping, short, compact, very tightly crafted messages there on page, making them very easy to focus on. That's one of the things that the biggest fight we have with every web project is how much stuff we are not going to put on the homepage. Everyone who's involved, all the stakeholders who were involved early on, have something that is their pet project that is, near and dear to their professional heart. They want it on the website, and yeah, of course, the more stuff you put on the web on that homepage, the less emphasis any of them have. So making sure that it is a message-driven design more than anything else, I'd say, is pretty critical. And then use the tools that feel comfortable. There are very different feels for a very staid financial services company versus a skateboarding sneaker brand, right? You're just going to have different things that you want.
Absolutely. So we've come to the end of our time. This has been really a wealth of information. Thank you, Andrew. So listeners, stay tuned. There's more coming. Right now, we're going to a break. You're listening to Passage to Profit with Kenya Gipson, sitting in for Richard Gearhart. I'm Elizabeth Gearhart, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Passage to Profit. I am Kenya Gipson, filling in for Richard Gearhart, and it is now time for Elizabeth's question.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Dave Doerrier, what kind of presentations do you like to attend in person?
Well, that's a great question. Number one, they need to be engaging no matter what the subject is. It's being, sometimes when I was a trainer, I would say trainers make the worst participants. I think presentation skill coaches make the worst participants because we're constantly evaluating whoever's up on stage. But number one being entertaining and engaging, and being a member of National Speakers Association. They would, every meeting, every month, they would bring in a great speaker and talking about the craft of building a speaking business. That always fascinated me, understanding their life journey. So engaging and hearing about the journey of how people have made this business a success.
Oh, that's great. And Andrew Schulkind, what about you?
I'll jokingly say that I love any presentation that doesn't involve a presenter reading their PowerPoint slides to me. As long as we avoid that, I'm good. So engaging, as David said, is important, but relevance. I'll sit through the person reading the slides if there's real value in it to me personally or business wise, or whatever I'm there.
Yeah. So Kenya Gipson.
I'm going to go a little rogue. I'm going to say, for me, I love to go to music concerts, and it is a form of a presentation, right? So I'm really against lip syncing. I'm really against bad audio. So all those things, like if that's going on, it's just not a good experience. And I just don't think it's a great presentation of an artist and their work if those things are out of order.
Yeah. So I like to go to entrepreneur forums. There's one, Aspire, is coming up. Barbara Cochran's going to be speaking at it. And I think I like those big ones, and it's not that expensive. It's in New York, but I like those big ones because, like, if it's Barbara Cochran, she's going to give a good presentation. She's going to engage her audience. She's not going to be boring. So I like those. I do like Broadway shows a lot too, which I think is another kind of presentation. I like the musicals. I like the comedies a lot. So I think anything that's, I think it's kind of how it makes you feel too, right? So if you go to a presentation that's not engaging, you feel bored and I want to go eat a chocolate chip cookie. Right? So I think it kind of depends on how it makes you feel. But I love education. So I love educational things too. So yeah, so we still have some more time to talk. So is there anything we didn't touch on that you think listeners would like to know? People that are thinking of starting a business or that have a business that needs some help?
I'll ask maybe not really a business related question, but I'll ask David anyway. As a fellow Long Island kid, I'm wondering if your Long Island radio is more WLIR or WBAB, or what? Those are the radio stations I remember from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, that's a great question. A classic Long Island radio. It's a internet based radio station, no commercials, 24/7. I have over 8,000 songs in the library, all from 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I would say that it's based on a combination of WBAB and WNEW during their heyday, back when they were mostly album oriented rock. And what I like to say about the station, there is a lot of deep cuts. There are the hits that you will recognize, but there are many more deep cuts from artists that you will recognize, and deep cuts from artists that you've never heard of. So it's been quite a journey for me when I started this back in 2015.
And you're still doing it now?
Still doing it now. You may not hear it in the background, but it's on in the background. It's a worldwide. You can listen to it worldwide. Go to CLIradio.com, classic Long Island radio, CLIradio.com. There's also a link on there, or a tab on there, where you can find where it's listed on multiple directories. It's even listed in iHeartRadio.
Yay, good. Well, excellent. Thanks, you guys. I now I want to go through everybody's websites and thank everybody who helped us with the show. So David Doerrier, you can find him at presentyourwaytosuccess.com. You can find him at elearningvoiceover.com, which I looked at that website. That's really interesting too. And then cliradio.com, as he just said, and then santahoho.com. So if you're in the Atlanta area and maybe want a Santa Claus, he's your guy. And then, of course, on LinkedIn. And then we had Andrew Schulkind with Andigo, Andigo, and it's andigo.com. And he also has marketing for small B2B businesses. And really, he's an expert in the field, I have to say. When I first met Andrew during COVID networking, I didn't understand what an expert in the field he is, but he's really your go-to guy. And I think he dives in deeper than a lot of people do to really look at cause and effect and strategy and new things coming up and the history too. So I'm really glad I'm working with them.
Thank you so
And
much.
yeah, so I want to thank our team, the Pod Sister Profit team. Thank you, Kenya Gipson, so much. You are my angel. You're my savior. She always fills in for Richard when he's not here. And she always does such a great job. And she comes when Richard is here and does a great job too. And
Thank you.
yeah, and you can find our podcast tomorrow. And you can find us on Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, hopefully soon on Threads. And we have a
Threads.
yeah, we have a YouTube channel. It's Passage to Profit Show. So you can either can find us at Passage to Profit Show or Passage to Profit, depending on which one you're going to. And thank you to Alicia Morrissey, who's our program coordinator, and Noah Fleischman, who is our producer, without whom the show would not be nearly as good as it is. Noah is a miracle worker, amazing. And thank you to our listeners. We love having you hear us, and we will see you and talk to you again next week.